Ngā mana, ngā waka, ngā reo, ngā karangatanga o te motu, tēnā koutou, kia ora no tātou katoa. It's my absolute pleasure to be here today facilitating our panel discussion where we're going to focus on some of the mahi and journey that we've had in working with the medical colleges. And as you'll see, I'm not Paparangi Reid. I know that might surprise some of you because some people take us as identical twins. But no, we're not the same person, but I do have kind of like a similar role to Paparangi's, but in the Otago space. So we share some similar experiences and journeys. So as we pull those threads together, I have I suppose resonated a few things from what we've heard. And I think in Luke's kōrero yesterday, he talked about the importance of our stories being our stories and the power that happens when we bring those stories together. And that bringing those stories together not only allows us to be ourselves and in our identity, but also to share that and learn from each other. I also want to acknowledge in Elena's kōrero yesterday where she talked about cultural safety and she raised Iri Hapiti Ramsden as part of her kōrero. And Iri Hapiti was an exceptionally amazing woman who some of us had the pleasure of knowing. And I think her addition to telling our stories, she wove in to that, and we must take action. And she had one framework which we teach our students, which is how do you be an agent of change? How do we be agentic in this space to achieve the goals that we have? And then from Nadine's kōrero, I really felt a really strong sense that we have a right to own our own vision and that we have opportunities for thinking and talking about what that vision is. And I'm really inspired and have some great aspirations for that. And then finally, the only other thing that popped into my head as I was thinking about that was Endgame. And my 12-year-old, I phoned her last night and I said, what have you been doing while Mummy's away? She said, I've been watching Endgame again. And it's about the 10th time. And I think what her problem is with Endgame is that she doesn't like the ending. And so I think she watches it again and again and again, hoping that the people who died didn't die and that Captain America doesn't become old. But there's something about that word endgame that I think resonates. And I think as we start to identify that we not only own our vision, but we also own a capacity to determine whether anyone else frames our ending in terms of inequalities, in terms of our outcomes. And so without further ado, I would also, I need to do housekeeping. If you are registered to attend the dinner but not coming to dinner, can you please go see Caitlin or go to reception? And also, if you didn't get a keep cup, please see reception. So those are my two housekeeping things. I'm going to introduce our first speaker for our panel. So we have three speakers, three amazing people who are taking us on their journey with the place of Indigenous health curriculum within medical colleges. And we have three case studies, and then they're all going to join me on the stage for a panel discussion. So our first person who's speaking is Mr. Kelvin Kong, who was introduced earlier today, and he's going to talk about his journey. Kia ora.
Thank you very much. And it's quite nice, the combination between Suze, Martina and myself, the many teleconferences we had in organising this was quite important. I do want to acknowledge that I am a visitor here and as a Warramai man, it's a real privilege to be here and to be amongst family. I do want to acknowledge that again. I thought I'd leave most of it to the panel discussion, but I thought I'd give you kind of a brief view of what it's been like in the College of Surgeons and where we've come from there, because I think it's quite an important journey. I was interested in chatting in the break with Nadine that when I was a first year medical student, I actually met her when she came to Newcastle for our very first AIDA meeting, which was quite special because I didn't realise that, but some of those links there show how family just keep coming around and family never leave you. Sometimes you want them to leave you, but most of the time it's a nice thing, and that's quite important to acknowledge. And so I think for us it's been quite a difficult journey, but also a rewarding journey in where we've come from. Initially when we've had the graduation, when I first finished, it was similar again to what Nadine was talking about. You almost feel like a circus and you're bantered around as this is going to change things forever, when in actual fact it's just the beginning of the road, and it's really just the acknowledgement that how far we are behind in what we're trying to achieve. And so the first lot of conversations and iterations with the College of Surgeons, because I'm quite excited by this, is what are we going to do to get more Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander surgeons within the college? New Zealand wasn't even talked about at that stage, which is quite incredible in that conversation. But when we really worked around how we're doing that, it was really around what we mean by having Indigenous capacity, what we mean by having sustainability within the college, and then how does that translate to the workforce. And it's interesting because a lot of it was around engagement of getting Aboriginal surgeons in place, but also they wanted to solve Aboriginal health problems. And it's quite difficult for the college because the college, realistically, the mandate they have is around training surgeons. They don't have a mandate on programs. And although a lot of our fellows are involved in programs, they didn't actually have any programs per se. So for us to suddenly say we're going to solve these issues or help in these aspects was quite hard. I think the first probably 3 or 4 years in the college and understanding this was a really difficult process because it was really still in that paternalistic approach, and certainly as a junior fellow of the college, it wasn't something that I could actually confidently speak up about to say, hang on, it's nice you're saying that, but more or less what I was saying is, come here, poor little kid, we're going to try and help save the world, when in actual fact, they need to look in the mirror to see how that world needs to be solved. And so having those general conversations around how you bring that back around to what it is was a huge process for us. And I want to acknowledge that before I even got in there, I think there was a lot of work that had been already done. So Pat Alley, Jonathan Coe had been doing an immense amount of work in New Zealand, which was really quite nice for me to tag along and see some of the stuff that's already been happening. And so what we did around that journey then is actually try and change the mentality. And before we actually started on this journey, was reflecting on the college itself, to have a look at itself, to see what we are and what we're trying to achieve. And I think we always talk about, and we still have that conversation now, and following some of the Twitter comments from the last few days around cultural safety and being able to work in an environment that's good, really comes down to the individual. And I think working with the college was taking a step back and taking a different approach. And that approach was, how does a college as an institution actually change to make sure the culture within the college is something that is conducive to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander health as well as Māori health. And that's quite a different concept, because it's not about the individual then, it's about the structures that are in place. Mind you, this was in the room surrounded by all our ex-presidents, which were all old white men looking around the wall. And it's kind of a bit spooky when you walk in the room, because I still think there's eyes out the back there looking at me going, what are you up to now, Kelvin? And so that kind of conversation is, well, hang on, let's reflect on that. And so the first thing they did, and for those in Australia understand what a reconciliation action plan is, was, well, Kelvin, can you go write the reconciliation plan? Well, hang on, this is not about me. This is about the college. And getting those comments on board was actually quite good, because the college actually took that on board, and within the college structure, there was this whole process about reflecting on what it means. Why is it that we can't get a lot of Aboriginal, Torres Strait Islander or Māori people employed within the college? Why have we not been doing that over the years when we're one of the oldest institutions? Why is it that when people want to apply, it's a whole different process than what we're looking at? And so getting some of those processes sorted out were quite a big deal for us, and it took many, many years to do that. What's really nice is that the iterations of the committee that we formed certainly moved up the chain in hierarchy. So as you move up in any kind of military forces, our committee kind of started right at the bottom, where we're just reporting to the janitor, I think, and then we just kind of moved up to who we're reporting to. And it's really nice to hear Maxine here talk about how we're actually going to be reporting to council hopefully soon. So going from the bottom to actually being a committee that reports straight to the top is quite influential in how the college works. And I think part of that then is what we talk about is having that power base so that we're at the table having the conversations and not at the table as that token person, but at the table actually having some meaningful conversations. And it was a really important process for us to do. Along that journey then, it's also important that we actually build the curriculum into that, because as part of the college working itself out, it's then for us to try and work out how we do that. So the next part was then, how do we actually improve our applications of surgery? Now, in any kind of specialty training, and I think probably more so for surgery, is that it's extremely competitive. And so that when you apply, there is a way to apply which is what you download on the net, and there's a way to apply which is knowing the system. And I think where we really struck out on that is that we just don't know how that system works. So understanding that system and getting that across. So having our junior guys come through and sitting down with them and saying, if you're going to apply, you need to have X, Y, and Z in your CV. You need to know how to present when you're talking in an interview and what kind of things you need to say. You need to get the right jobs, you need to get the right references. And all of that stuff means that if you actually prepare someone well to it, then they're going to be actually very good in the application process. So you don't have to worry about discrimination programs, because when they apply, they're absolutely fantastic. And some of the guys that are coming through now, I'm absolutely blown away by, and they'll be in the top 5, full stop, irrespective. And where people think sometimes this is a disadvantage is that, well, hang on a sec, this is what's been happening, and this is what hangs in families about application process, because you actually get your uncles, fathers, brothers sit down with you and go through this process, and we've never had that. And so it's about time we create that environment where our family, which is all of us, can start seeing those processes and actually get on that same level of applying. And what makes it more important about that then is that if they're number 1, 2 in the application process, when they actually start the training program, they're feeling really confident. They say, you know what, I'm actually deserving to be here, and I'm actually going to contribute to this in a huge way. And so that's been a big part of our process. And one of the wonderful things about seeing this process, and I was only commenting earlier on, is that most of the people that we're currently mentoring are women. And I think it's really nice in our Indigenous space that we really have a matriarchal capacity here, which is something that we should embrace, because in the conversations in the College of Surgeons around making sure that we're not bullying, harassing, is around this space. And I don't think we even talk about that in this space amongst us, because it's just such not an issue. Plus, we're scared. And then the final part of that is then how do we move forward in going together with the college? And is that now that we're starting to get that structure in place, now that we're starting to get that the reality in place of what that means, it's an easier conversation then to have in going forward. And one of the really nice things that's happened this year is that the college has moved to a different training mechanism, and that's moved from passing the exam to actually having competencies around it. And there are 9 competencies that we have, which include a whole range of things. Technical expertise is one of them. And for this year, we've added a 10th competency, which is Indigenous health. And that's a huge amount of work, and I think we need to applaud Maxine for really pushing that through the college, because that changes the way in which we talk about it now. So that means before you're allowed to leave our college and become a fellow, you have to be competent in Indigenous health. I think that's a huge, huge thing. Now, I think sometimes I reflect on that and think, I don't think they realise what they've signed up to here. But that's a cool thing, because it's another journey then to look at what it means for our fellows to actually be graduated and say they're competent. And it's a difficult conversation, because in the medical space, in the medical school space, it's been so well done at the moment that our fellowship is well behind what medical schools are. And so in many situations, we've got trainees coming through who are more culturally aware than what our trainers are. And that's a real disproportionate aspect that we've got to try and address. And so that means we need to rely on community more, which is actually wonderful for us, because it means we need to engage the community more to be part of this process, to be part of training our future, but also to be part of that conversation about what they mean at a community level to what they want to be Indigenous competent. And I think sometimes when we think about it in a broad context, it loses its strength. But when you talk about your own children going through and the experience that you want them to have, I think that makes a big difference as to how you want it to be treated, so that when you're going to the hospital, you're not feeling like this awkward, discriminated, talked about minority, that you actually treasured and you're actually valued, and they actually care about what you're going to do going forward. And that's a really big part of us for that. So hopefully some thoughts for talking about a bit later. Thank you.
So thank you, Kelvin. And Kelvin will be back as part of our panel. So we're holding off our questions until we all convene back. So if you've got burning questions for Kelvin, write them down. You'll get your opportunity later. So our next speaker is someone who I think we all know and love in this room, and someone who's been a major contributor in the Indigenous medical education space, our wonderful whānau from Hawaii, Professor Martina Kamaka. Nau mai hara mai.
Aloha kako, o Martina le aloha kamaka ko uinoa. No hale ko I kaneohe, I ko o lau poko, I o Oahu, I ka pai aina o Hawaii, no au. I want to just quickly acknowledge the kupuna of this aina and for welcoming us here, and the kupuna elders that come with each of us. We stand on their shoulders, and I know they're all here with us as well. So I want to share with you some of the efforts that we've done addressing graduate medical education at JABSOM. This is just our experience. So I'm going to start with the landscape. I guess they advance it for me, or do they advance it for me? Oh, sorry. Okay. So the U.S. is a little different. So I feel like I have to sort of set the stage a little bit for what's happening in our country. We have accreditation standards from the LCME, which is the accrediting body for medical schools. And they have actually addressed cultural competence head on. And I've highlighted here, I don't want you to read all of these things, but I just want to point out that they have highlighted some principles of things that we've talked about. Things like self-awareness, understanding diverse belief systems, impact of disparities. So these are pretty clearly defined. If you don't have them when the accrediting body comes through, you're in trouble with as a medical school. The difference is at our graduate level. So the ACGME is the Accreditation Council for Graduate Medical Education. And they have 6 core competencies, probably something related to what Kelvin said with their competencies. And they're there, you can see them. But what was interesting as you go in and look is they've come up with this idea called milestones, which is competency-based developmental outcomes. And so when you look through their milestones, I have 2 examples for you. If we look at internal medicine, they do not directly address what we would call cultural competency. They kind of get around it. It's kind of fuzzy, and it's kind of roundabout, you know. Each patient's unique characteristics and needs. What are we talking about? How are you going to measure that? Communicate effectively. Surgery is actually better. I was quite impressed. They actually mention cultural differences and self-awareness. And I have to actually acknowledge surgery even at the University of Hawaii. We've had for a number of years a cross-cultural healthcare conference that was actually sponsored by our Department of Surgery, which as a primary care doc all these years, you know, you always say, oh, surgeons, they only, what do they know about communication and interacting with, and you know, and wow, they're like at the forefront sometimes. It's been really eye-opening, so thank you to our fellow surgeons. But anyway, so I did a timeline. I wanted to focus on some of the curricular things that we offer both at the residency level and the medical school level at JABSOM. And I really have to say it's a cross-pollination type process. So if you look at our timeline way back, the family medicine, so family practice is our family medicine residency, you would call it your GP. So they developed a cultural standardized patient back in 2001. So they had the simulated cultural patient that the residents had to go through this exercise for almost 12 years. They did this. And when we developed our teaching team at the University of Hawaii in the Department of Native Hawaiian Health, we were very interprofessional. So we had physicians, we had social workers, we had a cultural anthropologist, we had community members, dietitians, you name it. So the cultural anthropologist was actually the faculty member from the Department of Family Medicine. And he was the one, as he joined us, he said, we were talking about what we could do at the residency level, what we call your graduate medical level, and the medical school. And he said, hey, we have this cultural standardized. Why don't we try to develop a Native Hawaiian health patient? So that was actually the very first thing we did, was we developed a Native Hawaiian cultural patient, 2 different cases, and we ran a pilot in the residency program. That was followed shortly after by an initiative at the medical school, which was cultural immersion for first-year medical students. And I'll be going into that in a little more detail. But what was interesting for me to see as the years progressed is from this immersion, we realized that there was certain didactics that were really important that we couldn't or didn't want to include on our weekends. Our weekends are very strengths-based, and we didn't want to take that time talking about our disparities and all those things they get elsewhere in the curriculum. But we realized that we do have to talk about it. So then the idea came up of this didactic series. And we were talking already about this was such a great experience doing this cultural immersion with our medical students. So our cultural anthropologist member goes, why don't we do it for our residents? Our residents need this as well. And then it was like, how do we incorporate what they're learning in the immersion and add this additional didactics? So then we got this FP didactics up there in 2007. And then that started in March, and that was sort of an orientation to Native Hawaiian, sort of our health disparities and our history. And then we started our family medicine immersion, and that went on for 7 years. Unfortunately, it didn't continue, and I'll be talking about some of those challenges. And as we did these immersions, we realized that we really needed to do a lot more teaching on different areas. And so we started getting workshops within the medical school. We have 3 workshops in the first year, 1 workshop in the third year, some simulated patients, and also some, what are they called? Mannequin type cases. And we also developed a medical student elective. And we finally got to our medical student cultural standardized patient or simulated patient, which was actually inspired by what happened with the Native Hawaiian, with the family medicine residents. So you can kind of see that, we did one thing here and it impacted med school. We did something in med school and impacted residency. So it's this kind of cross-pollination as we went along. And then things changed in 2014. I'll be talking about those. And we didn't go back into the residency until 2016 when we were actually invited in by the internal medicine residency program, and we were asked to do an orientation to Native Hawaiian health for the first years. They gave us a couple of hours. We did the best we can. We actually needed like a whole year, but you take what you get, right? You take what you get, you make the best of it, and if things go well, you hope that you get more time as things go along. And then finally, we were back in the FP residency. So I want to talk about our cultural standardized patients just a little bit. We use a triangulated system where the resident scores themselves, the preceptor or faculty member scores them, and the patient scores. The scoring is actually based on the ACGME core competencies. So we have a scoring criterion, and I want to encourage, if you want to learn more about it, we have a talk on it after lunch. Come to our talk. So this is the standardized patient. Again, it was inspired by what we did at the residency level, but it's really at the medical school level where it's taken off and really grown and expanded. The medical student immersion, the idea for our immersion was, and the idea for our immersion was they always hear about our health disparities. They always know we've got high rates of diabetes and cardiovascular disease. We are a strong people with an amazing history. We were scientists. We were the best at. We traveled the oceans. We navigated, and we didn't need instruments. We could read the winds and the stars and the waves and the currents. And it was powers of observation. Isn't that science, right? And we managed our land. We were the most isolated landmass in the world, Hawaii, in the middle of the Pacific. But we sustained a population of almost 700,000 people for hundreds of years. And we thrived. We're strong, but they don't get that message. So we wanted this immersion. We wanted to introduce them to our culture, our strengths, our values, and we took them to rural communities because there are resources in rural communities that they can use as they're coming up with treatment plans for our patients that you don't necessarily think about when you're just one-on-one in the classroom. But they needed to also understand our history. So this was our immersion, but we only had 3 days. You can't cover everything. So that's where this didactics came in. Now we're talking about our history, cultural trauma. We bring in our healers, traditional healers, because our patients are using healing. They're using our healers. They do lomi lomi. They do plant-based medicine, and our physicians, our students, they need to know this. And they need to be able to ask the question, and if this is important and a value for that family, they need to be able to work with healers to do what's right for the patient. So this is something else we did at the residency level. We had these discussions. We talked about our traditional diet. So that was sort of a supplement that we had to the immersion. The next thing so you remember I told you all this stopped in 2014. And all this stopped in 2014. So what happened was we were then invited back, but they only gave us 4 hours. So from a 3-day weekend and a didactics, which was a quarterly didactics where we came in for 2 hours every quarter, they gave us 4 hours. So we as a team had to sit there and go, what is the most important thing that we're going to try to teach these family medicine residencies in 4 hours? And this was the same process we did with internal medicine. And it came down to a couple core things. They need to know our history. You can't understand our problems if you don't know our history and you don't know the traumas associated with our history. You have to know who you are. So we take them through self-awareness exercise, but we base it in our culture. So our culture is, what is our place? What is our mountain? What is our river? What is our wind? What is our rain? We take them through sense of place exercises. Genealogy, who are you? How can we connect with each other? So that's what they do for self-awareness before you start looking at cases and how you interact with patients. You need to know who you are yourself. They need to know our values. This handsome man up there is one of our young Lomi Lomi practitioners. They need to know our traditional medicine is alive and well. And it's in the young generation. The young generation is taking it, and we're out there and we're growing, and they need to know that. So it's important for us that they all not only get exposed to elders, but they get exposed to that next generation of healers. So I wanted to just share this slide with you because I think there's some important things on this slide. This is an evaluation of one of the evaluations we did after our family medicine orientation. And I want to point out a couple things. One is that they got it. When I say sense of place, when we say sense of place, who are you? They got it. It is extremely important to get the sense of place of a patient. What are their values? What's important to them? Place. Where are you from? Taking time to establish foundation, getting to know each other as people before moving on to care is essential in determining the extent and level of care I can provide. These are quotes. Here's someone that wasn't from Hawaii, wasn't even from our country. Rapport is established differently here. Yes. It definitely is. Talking story in Hawaii is very different than it might be in China or in Minnesota or something like that. So you need to know how to talk to our patients and what they expect in that conversation. So, system challenges. I know I'm running out of time. We've had some systems. Things stopped. Why did things stop in 2014 in the FP residency? Budget, legal, and we had only one advocate in the department. I want to thank you. I'm sorry I went over. I have a future focus, but I hope to talk about that in our discussions. Thank you.
Kia ora, Martina. I think the conversations about budgets are ones that resonate with many of us, and I think it's bound to come up as part of discussions when we talk about resourcing and sustainability of the really excellent initiatives that we have. So our final panellist who's coming to speak to us, and again she doesn't need any introductions, is our Associate Professor Suzanne Pitama. And I also just really want to hugely acknowledge Suze for everything she's put into this conference. So, kia ora, Suze. I have a little bit of
Kia ora koutou, ka mihi mahana ki a koutou I tēnei wā. Ko maumakai te maunga, ko nuhaka te awa, ko kahanunu te tipana, ko kahanunu te tipana whare. Engari he tino ātāhua nā mokopuna o nai nā te erekehu, nā te mea ka moe au ki roto I te whānau o Onuku Marae. Nō reira, e noho anau ki konei I tēnei wā. That was just a really quick disclaimer. My last name is Pitama. Pitama is a Ngaitahu name. I was very young and naive when I first got married. And took on my husband's name, but actually my people come from the North Island and the beautiful warm oceans of the Mahia Peninsula. But I've had the privilege of being married into Ngaitahu and have them embrace me, envelop me. Smother and smould might be a bit too strong, but and when you breed for them, they really commit you to this place. So I just wanted to acknowledge them and acknowledge my team members who actually, especially Amber and Tanya, of whose land we're on at the moment, which is Ngai Tuahuriri. I just really wanted to quickly, I'm really humbled today to stand up with Kelvin and Martina. It was actually at the first or second line that I first met Kelvin, and I was a bit of a fangirl about especially the journey that he'd been on as the first Indigenous surgeon in Australia, and it's an honour to stand on the stage with him today. And Martina is just so sweet, and she has taught our team so much, and you know, this whole essence of aloha is really a great thing that our Hawaiian cousins bring with Lyme, because they are so open to share their many lessons. So I just wanted to talk briefly today about a few lessons for us at Otago. And we are really the new kids on the block. So I wanted to talk to you about landscape. So in terms of teaching into the college, we are the latest kids off the block, and I just wanted to give a bit of context. So here we are. Aren't we gorgeous? This is #Team Otago. And I'm so grateful, to belong to a university which actually has put aside the resources to allow this many fabulous people to come today. But actually this is not all of those that are involved in Indigenous health teaching, and I especially want to acknowledge Joe, who has a huge job in terms of recruitment and retention of our Indigenous students, and why at our next year's class, or this year's class, we had 65 Indigenous students out of the 300. She's done amazing work. And I also want to give a shout out to the AMC, and I know Jeff's here, and I'm not just trying to get money, but in 2000, the Otago Medical School was accredited, and actually this site here in Christchurch failed. And they failed because they had no Indigenous teachers. And so my position in 2001 was actually because of systemic pressure on our universities to actually be teaching Indigenous health. And I just wanted to really acknowledge the place of accreditation and advocating for Indigenous health. And I was really inspired this morning by Prof Ian Simmons and his words, because the medical deans and their work in 2004 to produce and to work alongside us as educators to produce the CDAMS document has been pivotal, I think, in our work in Australia and New Zealand and being able to move things forward. So I really wanted to shout out to both the medical deans and the AMC. And because of that work and that advocacy and the pioneers that have gone before me, both in Australia and New Zealand, Otago has been able to utilise both our research and our that's been done in Australia and New Zealand, and also our patient voices to design an Indigenous health framework, specifically the Hui process and the Meihana model, where we really draw on the determinants of health, both conventional and Indigenous specific. Sorry, Nadine, just stealing a couple of your words there because they were really cool. And actually, this framework has allowed us as a school to develop, some of our colleagues, I won't name disciplines, have up to 500 learning outcomes, but we're Indigenous people, we have learnt to be efficient, we have 10. So we have 10 learning outcomes at our Otago Medical School, and although we have 3 campuses, and shout out to Bridget, who's our other Associate Dean Māori at the Wellington campus, that we have a shared curriculum across our 3 campuses that really focus on these 10 learning outcomes, and they all map back to our Indigenous health framework. Now, what this allows us to do is 2 things. One, ensure we have really clear social accountability. It's the reason that we're here, and the reason that we have such a beautiful, vibrant Otago Medical School is because all our Indigenous health teaching team is committed to not just closing the gaps, but aspiring to amazing health outcomes and well-being for our people. And so we need to be really socially accountable back to our communities, not just to our institutions. And the other thing that we're really passionate about is because we have an Indigenous health framework, we can do assessments. This is one of my more fun ones. This is a rectal exam. The important thing, and I'm going to build on top of what Martina has already covered, our patient voices say that actually teaching about our Indigenous specific determinants of health is so important. So they love it when they don't have to explain themselves to our students. When they say they've gone to a tangi, the students know how to explore that, what that means. When they're talking about whāngai, roles and responsibilities with dual parenthood, our students understand that stuff. But our interest in the advanced learning medicine, so the last 3 years, is how do they take that cultural knowledge and the Indigenous specifics, take on the broader context of determinants of health and actually apply it within clinical practice. And one of the times, and especially around intimate exams, and I don't know if you get more intimate than an rectal exam. If you do, please don't tell me, because I'd like to stay naive on that. But this is really fun. So we do a lot of work with our clinical skills unit, and just a little disclaimer, this isn't actually our Māori health workers' actual bum. You can actually get these really cool hybrid bottoms, and you can change what the students feel, different pull-ups, and how the Pākehās use it is it comes on a stand. And so they have a patient in one bed and the kumu in the other bed. And so they talk to the patient, then they move over to the other bed and they examine the bum. And we thought, that's not realistic. So we unscrewed it and we put it on the simulated patient's bottom. And it makes so much more sense, right? It's reality. And we have little cues. So the clinical assessor in the room winks when the student's entering and she goes, oh, your hands are cold. And it's the best reaction ever. And you know the coolest thing is, we've done this, I don't know, maybe 7 or 8 years, and the 5th years just love the element of surprise, so they never tell the next group. So every year, you have these students sweating that they're going to do a rectal exam in front of their colleagues, and then it's just super fun. And then this assessment is not just done by us, and the interesting thing about the way that we assess is actually you can fail our course if you do not pass Māori Health. And actually last weekend, 9 of us were locked in rooms between Wellington and Christchurch and Dunedin, assessing the 5th year high stakes exam in the Indigenous OSCE. And so they have 8 OSCEs, of which one is Indigenous, but also throughout the year in terms, they must pass Hauora Māori in order to pass the year. The bummer for us as Indigenous health teachers is if they don't pass, they have to do remediation with us. It's only because that takes time and money and resources, but there are consequences. And so I think that's a really big stake in the sand for our institution. Also, our community assesses our students. We do a lot of community screening. My best quote was from a 6-year-old. We do screening in a full immersion language school. And a 6-year-old said, you know those students, that student that I work with, he wasn't that bright. And she said, so actually, I'm going to be a doctor. And I thought that was just a beautiful, beautiful assessment. And we've worked really hard to ensure that our research and that we have evaluated, researched and published on all of our initiatives to support our wider Lyme network, hopefully to be able to build on the evidence that we're trying to gain. We're about 30 papers behind where we should be, but watch this space over the next couple of years. So I think the movement into the medical colleges for us was actually triggered again by the AMC moving to now accredit the medical colleges. This has made a really big, changed our environment for us, traditionally just based at the medical schools. And just in real brief, what happened is the Māori Advisory Group from RANZCOG, and I'm really grateful to see lots of them here today, approached us to vertically integrate because they were getting our graduates in their programs. And our graduates get a really vibrant, exciting curriculum, but then they hit the colleges and it's back to 101. There's no other place in medicine where that happens. And so working with RANZCOG, and we've worked with them for the last 2 years and piloted it with in a health professional course with other disciplines as well, including oncology. We've been able to pilot and look and really focus on what does vertical integration look like past our final year students, and how do we teach grown-ups. So just in brief, so that was kind of exciting. The other assessment, just in closing, that we have is that as Indigenous health teaching teams, it's not just confined to the teaching environment, is it? Our team actually does a lot of work in the community. We are assessed by our community. We're expected to turn up to community screening days, to talk at things they need us to advocate, to face up to district health boards, to advocate with GPs. And I just really do a big shout out that there's a lot of hours outside of med school that go into it. So I just wanted to talk really quickly about a couple of challenges we've had. We have turned down direct communication with college representatives by themselves. We've decided that we really only belong in medical schools, and it will be only by the invitation of Māori advisory groups from within the colleges that we will engage, because the true leadership is within the Indigenous members who are thriving and both surviving in the colleges. We do not see, as our team at Otago, it is not our place to move our Indigenous leadership into the college space. There is already Indigenous leadership there, and we want to honour and support them. The next thing is that we've learnt a lot about grown-up doctors. They're not as kind of cute as our med students for a couple of reasons. They're not used to being, so this is what an average clinic looks like when you're a medical student at Otago. There's a lot of peer critique. We teach them how to critique each other on the Meihana model so that we want to reduce medical misadventure with Indigenous patients, but I didn't realise, this is my naivety, that when you put a grown-up doctor into that hot red seat, that they have an allergic reaction because it's a long time since they've been critiqued. And then it became worse when our registrars sat in that seat and nailed it, and then their senior consultants struggled. Now, this was my naivety, and so we've realised that we cannot train supervisors and registrars together. It's not a culturally safe space for either of them or ourselves. The other thing is, we didn't realise that CME points come from attendance. But we will not give you a completion of course unless we have assessed you. And so we learnt that actually that this is an interesting space when you won't give someone a certificate because they attended, but they need to pass the assessment, which in med school everyone knows they're going to get access, but I didn't realise grown-ups think is different in the college space. And so we've had to really negotiate with the college, and RANZCOG have been amazing that have allowed us to actually not give certificates unless assessed. And we're not giving certificates on cultural competence, we're giving certificates on completion of the course in the hui process and Meihana model. So just quickly, and closing, I've got 1 minute to go. In terms of future focus, this picture really encapsulates it all to me. This is actually, again, a 5th year case that we do in cannulation with an Indigenous patient. That's not his real arm. I'm just so into hybrid stuff. And I probably don't trust my students to be doing cannulations on our community just at this point. But I want you to pay attention to that beautiful young woman right up there in the corner. That's Dr. Courtney Thomas. I met Dr. Courtney Thomas. I haven't told her this, so I hope I don't embarrass her, but I met Dr. Courtney Thomas as a year 2 student, year 2 or 3 student. She was down in Dunedin with Joe, and she came up and did a summer studentship with us. Then she came to the Christchurch School and was one of our most amazing students and graduates. And then she did some research as a registrar. She's now a consultant anaesthetist, and I'm her PhD supervisor. She is one of our senior clinical lecturers, and she assesses our students and comes in and is one of our teachers. And it's under her and Amanda Gimlet's leadership in the College of Anaesthetists that we'll be teaching into the Anaesthetist College next year. And that's our future focus, to build these Indigenous leaders within the college space and do our best to support them. Kia ora.
Kia ora. I think this was alluded to kind of numerous times and seemed to be an ongoing theme that you all touched upon, whereby we have, quite culturally competent students coming out of med school and then getting to the point where they are being assessed by people who may be far more culturally incompetent, but they still need to be assessed on that realm. How do we address that, difference?
Do you need that, or you got it on?
Can you hear me? Oh, yeah. Sorry, I think that's a great point. And there was a really interesting study done in the College of General Practice in Australia that they published, where they designed an Indigenous module, and it had an Indigenous patient video, I think it was, in it. And then the GP supervisors were evaluated on how the whole thing worked. And then the Indigenous supervisor, the GP supervisors came up really lacking. So they critiqued all of the clinical stuff, but that didn't take into account the determinants of health stuff for this particular Aboriginal case. But in evaluating it, what they found is there was this huge knowledge gap, and the GP supervisors didn't feel confident or feel that they were the appropriate people to be doing that assessment. And I think that's where our gaps are, that we're so focused on our junior doctors and there's not that ongoing professional development to catch people up, and how that works and how we build on that. But Kelvin might want to add to that.
I'd agree completely. And one of the hard things that we've struggled with is that there's this hierarchical system within the colleges that assumes that when you're a consultant, then you have the knowledge base. And this is a space where none of our consultants have the knowledge base, and me included in some of those protocols in country that I don't work in, or nations I don't work in. And so I think the answer to that is that you must have community-controlled delivery of these programs where the community are the assessors. And in many aspects, we're doing that better now. So in research grant applications, having a community jury to assess the validity of what the outcomes are going to be before it even gets processed. within the universities, making sure that there are employed Aboriginal people in our local area that are delivering the curriculum content and that are the go-to people in an appropriate way, which is not just relying on the token one or two people that do it for free kind of thing. It's really getting those systems in place. And at the college level then is that how do we build a system, and this is the process we're currently going through, that looks at, and I very, very brief from what I was talking about before because there's a whole lot of work behind this, is what does it mean for your fellow to be culturally competent? And that includes not only our registrars but our whole workforce. And we have a lot of work around the AMC, so around our overseas graduates, yet we don't focus on our graduates. And I think sometimes I get frustrated with those who are near retirement that want to come and give back because suddenly they feel guilty. But also there's a whole lot of fellows there that really want to be in this space but just don't know how to interact. So it's for us to make sure we give them a safe space where they can ask their silly questions, where they can talk about those things, and we need to address that in a non-combative component, even though, you know, I've got a whole folder full of some of the funny things I get asked, which I'd love to do a presentation on sometime. But it's, you know, it's a safe space, so I would never repeat any of those things without them. So it's how do we address that and show the system and the system take over so it's not putting on our personal time.
Kia ora, thank you for your presentations. I'm Jash Agrawal, radiologist from the College of Radiology. I had a question for you, Kelvin. I just had a quick look at the reconciliation plan. We've got a similar one where our Indigenous Council reports to our council, and it all sort of looks great. Like from our point of view, it all looks good on paper, but what I'm finding on the ground as a supervisor or a director of training is it's not being filtered down, and so we just got accredited and we showed the AMC all these wonderful documents. But how do you address kind of getting cultural safety, cultural competency to the floor in the wards? And the other question is, are you assessing it programmatically, like building it in throughout assessment through training, or because I think that's useful, but again, trying to do it in a meaningful way is always difficult. And I think I've spoken to you, Suze, about trying to maximise face-to-face time in a way that you can actually teach cultural safety, engage people's self-reflection. And I think in the New Zealand context it's fine, but I think in the Australian context it becomes more complicated with multiple nations, and I just wonder what your thoughts are with those two questions.
The first part, absolutely, it's important that leadership, so council needs to be involved in this process and council needs to be aware of this. And I think the more we engage with council and the people that are making those decisions, the quicker we'll get to that right space. The second part of the question is around how do we better educate. We're going through that process at the moment. So we've moved away from a didactic question answer to a competency. And so the question, or the internal questions we're having now, is that what does it mean to be culturally competent and how to actually achieve that? Because at the same time as what we're trying to achieve, you need to realise that from a system point of view, because it's a system that we want to change, is that you need to make sure that everything's available. And one of the analogies that we've really tried to push forward is the push versus pull. And we don't want to be pushing people into Indigenous health, but we want to make it attractive so that people come out of that and go, amazing, fantastic. Example of that is that one of the courses that we do is a course called the TIPS course, and it's open to everyone. I encourage you to do it. It's a wonderful course about advocacy, collaboration, communication. And it's a voluntary course like the EMST that you can do for a weekend. And as an instructor in there, it's very valuable in the comments that come out. Now, the Orthopaedic College, which is probably one of the more progressive in this area, have mandated that every of their trainees has to do this course. And so the course has only got 20 people in. So the first thing you do is go around the room and say, why are you here? And everyone gives a wonderful answer. Every orthopaedic person says, because I have to. Yet at the end of the course, every single orthopaedic registrar there is a real advocate for the course, where they come and go on, I didn't realise there was so much of this, I've learned so much, I've gained so much. And so from a point of view of where they're kind of gone there kicking and screaming, to coming out of there and actually telling everyone to go do the course, is a really good advertisement, but it's a really good session for us to appreciate that if you do it in a good way, in an encouraging way, which is not just, you're not doing it right, then you're actually going to get more buy-in. And where the benefit for that is it's not the benefit for us. It means that our families and our communities are actually going to benefit because they're going to go back to the community and be a whole different person in terms of their treatment.
And I had some great feedback about a couple of weeks ago where one of our students, we talk about assessing and peer critique, feedback that they had been in an O&G consult as part of their runs. And they were like, my gosh, the clinician was amazing. They did the whole everything that we teach them to do. And they said, they could improve at a few things. They didn't quite get it, but they were quite good, for a consultant. And actually, then we did our homework and we found out who the consultant was and realised it was someone that had come on to the Rainscold course. And that's a very powerful thing, and that's why I think colleges and med schools do need to work together because we're cross-pollinating and it is that vertical integration. And when our students can see consultants doing what we're coaching them to do, it's so powerful. But it does take a lot of persuading to get the grown-ups on the course.
I just wanted to follow up on the vertical integration. One of the things we have to keep in mind as hard as we train our students at the registrar residency level, you get people coming into the programs from outside, maybe even different countries. So there always has to be you always have to at some point not forget that basic education about history, place, and impact of that. And also, I just want to make a comment. I know I'm speaking to the choir, but I think assessment is really a challenge. I mean, I think to go out of didactics into more competencies and simulated patients and things like that is wonderful, but it's really hard in the Western framework to do this kind of evidence base, and we know, I think as Indigenous people, what is working and we're seeing change and what we want to see and what our patients want to see, but sometimes it's hard to put those numbers and that evaluation criteria on it. So I think that's going to be a struggle as we keep going in this work, is we're going to make these changes, but who's going to say that we're successful at what we're doing? And as we work within these Western medical colleges, and they're going to want this evidence base, I think we need to stand up and say, this isn't all about evidence base. That there's other ways of learning and measuring success. Yeah.
Sorry, and if I can just do another little comment, is that 4 years ago at Otago, we also separated the curriculum. So we have an Indigenous health curriculum and we have a culture, self and diversity curriculum. Because we're such a small resource, we can't teach everything about cultural self, about cultural competency and safety, and we don't own all that space either. We have a really diverse community in New Zealand, and we always have. And so we've actually separated the curriculum out so that we're really clear on what components we can deliver on and what is the broader curriculum needs to respond to.
Kia ora. I'm John Allen from Australia. I'm a psychiatrist, College of Psychiatrists. I just want to ask a question of Kevin, a little both. One is that Australia is a little lacking behind for New Zealand. We have, in our college, we have 8 Indigenous psychiatrists and we have in Australia, and we have 17 in New Zealand. So on a population basis, New Zealand's doing much better. We put a lot of burden on those few people that we have in each college. And so we're playing a catch-up game of waiting for your wonderful medical graduates to come and become trained, become the supervisors and doing that. How do you stop the burnout for those few people who get the burden of having to do it? And what do we do in the meantime?
Do you want to tackle that one? Go first. I feel burdened answering that question. I think it's increasingly important, and I think I don't understand it well enough to appreciate a valid answer. I immerse myself in my work, and I'm very passionate about both the work but also this work here.
where it's, I think, harder in that aspect is that when you immerse yourself in your work, it's financially rewarding. When you immerse yourself in Indigenous health, it's financially destructive. It's also family destructive on you as well, because the amount of time you're away, that's away from my children, which, you know, it's a part of me where we talk about family, yet we're leaving family to have these meetings. And I think the college needs to be better at, and it's one of the things I've tried to make sure of, is build the systems so the systems look after. So it doesn't matter who's in those roles, but the system says there has to be Aboriginal representation. So it's the college's responsibility to find that representation that's appropriate. It has to be the role of the universities to make sure it's there. And that's where the AMC is good with that, because once we mandate that, then it's their responsibility to do so, but also do so in a manner which is exactly the same applied to anyone else. So in the hospital, if you've got someone that's employed for HR and responsible for HR, that they're remunerated in a proper way, that they work the hours that they're told to, yet when you do that to an Aboriginal person, they're expected to be the health worker, the advisor, the counsellor, the educator, as well as the other roles they take in there. And I think appreciating the multiple roles there is quite hard, but at the same time is that because we're so numbers poor, it's a harder game. And so, you know, two line meetings ago, you wouldn't have as many people here, but also from a college point of view, for my surgery-wise, is that having 4 surgeons in this room is just mind-blowing for me. And then, you know, the next 2 meetings, when we've got so many amazing candidates coming through, I'll have a massive smile on my face, not because we've got a dozen or more here, but because I'll be passing the baton to them and saying, go on and go on.
And can I add one more thing, is that one thing that I think works in the college space is to ensure that the Indigenous leadership has the appropriate administrative support. Because I think one of the biggest burdens that happens is when you're trying to do governance and leadership, as well as kind of the more management, actually doing the projects. And I've been really impressed with the colleges that are able to put together Indigenous project teams by which then clinicians can do the leadership but are not burdened with actually the implementation.
I'm going to borrow something. I think that issue of how do people in leadership roles in colleges or in organisations actually value, respect and support Indigenous leaders as they try and support Indigenous development. One of the things that I have noticed is that there's often a disconnect between the policy and strategy of what people say they want to do and then the behaviour of people in terms of supporting the implementation of that. So you can often have people who've agreed to a very proactive Indigenous policy, we need to have this, but the Indigenous person on a committee might say, in order to achieve that, we do this. And the very same people will turn around and say, yes, but. And so I think there's a sense that there needs to be some training of people who are in leadership roles to know what it means to be a meaningful leader in support of Indigenous issues. And so within a New Zealand context, people who are working at a college space need to know and understand the treaty and what are their obligations and responsibilities as people on a governance board to support the implementation of the treaty, those kinds of things. So it's actually a sort of, people need to up their game in terms of support for Indigenous people as well.
I just wanted to make a quick comment about increasing numbers, and that you have to value those numbers. So, for example, I want to just talk about the team from Native Hawaiian Health that's here with me today. You might say, wow, there's 6 of us here or 5 of us here. But what you don't realize is that they're actually, all the work they do with me is volunteer. So yeah, we've upped our numbers, but they all have FTEs that are going elsewhere in the medical school, but they're passionate about Native Hawaiian Health, so they volunteer to help me with the curriculum. And I love them for it, but it's just not right. and it's not fair. And so there's one thing about talking about upping our numbers, but we also need to, what does that really mean as far as valuing and supporting them? And that means the money, the support, the time.
I've got the thing, again, I want to ask one more question, which was about volunteers. And a question for my college and other colleges. How many colleges are actually paying their Indigenous committees for the voluntary work that they do? Because colleges are usually based on the fellows giving their time for free. I'm sure Kelvin's here for free, I'm here for free. But have we got a system of actually where we put, what we value we pay for?
Absolutely. I think it's also getting into the mindset of the college that is required. Is Chelsea and Damien here in the room? Can they stand up? Oh, they're right in front of me. So can you guys stand up? Because I think it's really important. The college has acknowledged this important role. And so as our fellows, we have 5,000 fellows, we have 2,000 retired members, we have a bunch of staff, and that's our 2 Indigenous representations that are full-time employed people. And it's taken us a long time to get that, and we hope that that'll grow and grow and grow, but it's important for that. I think that's different to the fellowship, and I still think the fellowship, if the college paid for the fellows' work, they would not be able to run it all, because the amount of time you give outside of hours is incredible. But without their support particularly, there's no way I'd be able to do the stuff that we do, and certainly our committee wouldn't be able to do the work that we do without the college support. And so I need to give a shout out to the College of Surgeons, because they're very supportive financially for that.
Well, kia ora everyone. I think we have come to the end of our session. And I would very much, I think we've heard a lot of rich information, and I want to acknowledge the leadership that you 3 have shown and demonstrated. And I think the examples that you've provided are ones that are very much a journey, and that the journey has many different facets, and the flexibility of different skills. I noticed we got to here, and then we had to do this, and we got to there, and then we decided we needed to do there, so we did that in order to get to here. And I think all of your stories had that, and it so resonates. The cunning, the flexibility, and the commitment. And I suppose for me, what I would love us all to be thinking about, particularly those people coming from the colleges and the medical schools, is what is it that can be done to support that journey to not be so difficult and challenging? How can we create a much more straightforward and direct journey where these things happen as a matter of course, not a matter of cunning? And so I do really want us to all put our hands together and acknowledge our leaders.